So, hello everybody. As I said, I was going to talk a little bit about Dungeons and Dragons, and here is the next book that I want to cover, and I'm going to cover it in installments. It's called Ghosts of Saltmarsh. It's for 5e. It was released in May, or this is the first printing, May 2019. So it's almost 2 years old at this stage. What is Ghosts of Saltmarsh? Well, first of all, this is, I believe, the first book that came out with an alternate cover. This is the cover for hobby stores. So basically, this book with this cover would not have been available through online stores. You would have had to go to a shop and pick it up. So it's got an alternate cover that is the normal one, and these are the special covers, and I believe this is the first book to have sported one of those. Now, what is Ghosts of Saltmarsh? Well, Ghosts of Saltmarsh is actually a collection of adventures which centre around the town of Saltmarsh and its environs. So, as far as I'm not really well versed in the multiverse of D&D at all, but I believe Saltmarsh is based in Greyhawk. So, first of all, what does the book have to offer? It first offers Saltmarsh and a description of the town and its environments, and then you get several adventures that you can play. You can either play them as part of a campaign centered around Saltmarsh, and there's also a description of how you would run them and in which order, and how they would impact a story around the Scarlet Brotherhood. I'm going to explain who they are in a second. Or you can actually just take them and throw them into an existing campaign that you're running. And then you can, of course, completely eliminate the idea that it's set in Greyhawk. In fact, I would say a hallmark of a well-written book, and this is a well-written book, I can tell you this up front, my verdict is this is a really good book, is that you can just take the adventures and put them into a completely different setting, and even into a completely different system. So, Saltmarsh, first of all, I'm going to show you a map of the town. This is Saltmarsh. The one thing that I find a bit odd about this whole thing is that according to the description, Saltmarsh has 5,000 inhabitants. Now, I find it hard to believe that 5,000 people could live in this region because there are just so few houses. So, I'm honestly not quite sure if 5,000 is correct. Maybe it's actually 500 and it's a printing error, because there is no way 5,000 people would fit into this very small village. But that's just one thing that struck me, and that's the only thing that struck me. So, Saltmarsh is, as it says here, a nondescript fishing village tucked away on the southern coast of the kingdom of Keoland. Now, Keoland is a kingdom that has basically ignored its southern regions, and it has been fighting a lot in the north, and it made incursions into northern lands, but then got defeated, and while it was occupied elsewhere, and while the king was occupied elsewhere, there was a group of marauders, buccaneers, slavers, operating in the southern regions by the sea and in the sea, and they call themselves the Sea Princes, and they formed an alliance, and they are basically terrorizing the seas. Within the town itself, there are different factions. There is the traditionalists that basically don't like the Sea Princes, because the Sea Princes are by and large evil, they're dangerous, they kill people for a living, they trade in slaves, they're a bad group. And they're, of course, trying to hold on to the power in the region. They don't run Saltmarsh as a city or village. They just basically run the region. And they are very dangerous. So the traditionalists are smugglers, fishermen. You know, they want the town, the village, well, it's village, town, city. It's a village to stay the way it is. They don't want the king that has finally decided to turn his gaze south and fight the Sea Princes to influence what's happening in the village. They want everything to stay as it is, and they don't want the Sea Princes to do anything and want to keep them out, but they're also very much in love with the status quo. So the fact that there is now a group of dwarves that has come into town and started a mining operation, and it looks like it's going to be a successful one too, is a thorn in their side. They don't like that. Then we have the faction of the loyalists. They are very much in favor of the king of Keolan taking an interest in the village. They want the village to thrive as part of a strong kingdom. They are all about security and keeping the enemies of the kingdom at bay. And they are basically people who uphold the law. They are opposed to smuggling, so they're opposed to also the traditionalists who are kind of like, smuggling is a victimless crime, as it were. The loyalists don't think so. They think it's a crime because it's unlawful. And they also basically, the loyalists, in a way, run the town's guard. So they, of course, have the military power in these lands. They also want to expand Saltmarsh. And of course, since they want to expand its reach and its importance, they are also not unhappy about the dwarves coming in, because if the dwarves' mining operation is successful, Saltmarsh is definitely going to grow. For each of these two factions, you have sample characters that are part and parcel of the city of Saltmarsh, or the village, or the town, whatever you want to call it. Who they are, what their agenda is, what their flaw is, their bond, their ideal, their personality traits, so that you can actually play them really well. The last faction is the so-called Scarlet Brotherhood. Now, the Scarlet Brotherhood is actually a really weird group of people who is seeking active world domination. That's what they're out to do. They want to take over the whole world. And it says here that unlike the other factions in Saltmarsh, there is no good side to the Scarlet Brotherhood. As unrepentant megalomaniacs, they are villains through and through. And they have managed to infiltrate the town. And Anders Solmor, who's a young, lawful good male human noble, has inherited his family's fleet. And he's a member of the, if you like, the Council of Saltmarsh. And the Scarlet Brotherhood has managed to send in Scarren Wave Chaser, who's a lawful, evil, male human assassin, as his advisor. The problem is, of course, Anders doesn't know. So Scarren is trying to undermine everything. He is totally loyal on the surface to Anders, but of course he's got a very hidden agenda, which is to bring in more and more Scarlet Brotherhood agents to undermine everything that's happening and to take over the town. So that's essentially the setup of the politics of the town. For each of these, you also have sample events that you can roll on that could happen. So that's very good for the DM. You also get your overview over militia and defense, local law enforcement, crime and punishment. So, for example, a minor crime, what would that be? What would be the punishment, etc. So that you get an idea of, well, okay, somebody stole fruit from the fruit stall. What happens to them? You know, because it puts kind of a flavor on it, even when you have somebody in your group that may have stolen something. There are rogues. What would happen to them? You know, it's quite nice to have all of this there. You have commerce. What can people do? Well, of course, there's fishing, there's trading, there's smuggling, there is mining. What kind of information can you get? The docks, dock rumours, mood of the town is, of course, dependent on the success of the fishing fleet. And basically, you can roll on how successful has the fleet been. Then you get a description of the city of Saltmarsh and all of the points of interest. Also, as you go through this description as the DM, you will encounter NPCs that may be able to help your adventurers in their adventuring. They could give them tasks. So, for example, there is a tanner, and she's willing to pay quite a lot of money if they bring in the hides of rare beasts. And rare beasts would be anything over a challenge rating of 3 and above. And it basically says, well, you need to hunt it down to bring it in, and then you have to succeed at a couple of rolls to see is the hide in good enough shape for her to find it interesting, and then she will pay a lot of money. Then of course there is which I really like. It's the faithful quartermasters of Eus, and they've got Captain Zendros, who's a chaotic evil female tiefling priest, and she is willing to trade in magical items. So if your characters have some, they can sell them to her. Or she's also willing to sell us magical items, but those will come with a curse. So the PCs won't know unless they pass certain checks that actually they have been cursed. But she's also somebody who will say, okay, well, I'm looking for such and such an artifact or such and such a magical item. Go and find it for me. Then, of course, there are different taverns that people can go to. For example, there are the Hool Watchtower, which is basically, it watches over the Hool marshes, and depending on your luck, you can also give tasks to your group like recover stolen goods, apprehend a wanted criminal, rescue a captive, so you have a D6 roll here. Or the Carpenters Guild Hall, they can send you into the Hool Marshes or the Drowned Forest to get them stuff. So the town, and of course there is more to this, and you can just go in and come up with your own ideas of what could happen in this town. But also you can take these things and just transfer them into your own system, into your own world, which is very easy to do. So it gives any dungeon master the possibility of filling this village with life. It also gives you information about downtime activities in addition to the ones that you can find in the Player's Handbook and in the Dungeon Master's Handbook. It also describes the region of Saltmarsh, and here we've got a really lovely map of the region of Saltmarsh. So Saltmarsh is down here. You've got the Tower of Xenopus, you've got the Haunted House, the Dwarven Mine down here, so it kind of gives you an idea of Saltmarsh and the Dwarven Mine. That's quite a ways away. 1 hex is 10 leagues, so that's 15 miles from Saltmarsh to the Dwarven Mine. Here you've got the Dreadwood, which is described, and it's a very interesting place in my opinion. I'm definitely going to steal this for my own Midgard campaign. You've got the Drowned Forest up here, which is also really well described. The Silver Stand, there are elves here. You've got the Hool Marshes, you've got the Sahuagin Fortress, Lizard Folk Lair, Abbey Isle, and for most of these there is actually an adventure in this book. So when you go into the Dreadwood is basically kind of like different regions. You've got the light woods, and then it's a little more dense, and then you get to the really, really terrible center. There is an abyssal incursion in the Drowned Forest, for example. In the Dreadwood forest, you can also encounter the Night Hag, called Granny Nightshade. She's a really terrible person. So it's going to be really, really interesting. You can do lots and lots of interesting things in there, and you can just steal them as well. And then, of course, since this is a seaside adventure, you can also encounter weird ships like the Gnasher, the Pale Prow, which is a vampire's ship, the Dreadnought, which is a ship that is captained by a completely crazy male human mage, chaotic evil. There are also sunken ships like the Sinker, the Escape, and the Curiosity. The Curiosity essentially was sent out by Mordenkainen went down, and it is now you can try and dive for stuff in those ships. Unfortunately, the one that was sent by Mordenkainen is guarded by a Marillith, whatever this is. I don't have the monster manual at the moment, so I can't even check what this is. And unless you're Mordenkainen himself, it will attack you. So there are lots of things you can do there, and of course you've got random encounters. Some of them are also just curiosity encounters. So, for example, in one area you can find a hunter's shack that has been overtaken by slimy moss. Inside the shack, a humanoid skeleton lies on the earthen floor. Yeah. No, Phoenix, don't. Its exploded chest is mysteriously the source of the moss. So these are not necessarily things that will attack you, but these are things that are of interest. They are oddities. Then, of course, we come to Adventures in Saltmarsh. It basically tells you how you can put this together for a campaign around the machinations of the Scarlet Brotherhood. And it then tells you how to use this and what to do about these particular story items and how to tie them together. You can also bring in the tales from the Yawning Portal, and it gives you ideas of how to do this. And then, of course, they come to the meat, in my opinion, for an adventuring group. And that is to build a group that is either from Saltmarsh or has ties to Saltmarsh. So either you start in Saltmarsh or you come to the town and you have ties to it. And so basically they take the backgrounds that you can find in the player's handbook, like acolyte, charlatan, criminal. They have new ones like the fisher, so that's a little more fleshed out because obviously the acolyte is described in the player's handbook, and it just gives you additional things that you can use to make it more appropriate. You've got the guild artisan, but you also have, they could be in the Mariner's Guild or the Dwarven Artisans. You can be a Marine, so it tells you how to build that character. Sailor, of course, shipwright. I believe I played an Outlander in our Barovia campaign. So basically, you can use this to build characters, or if you've got an existing character, to tie it into Saltmarsh. And that is the beginning of the book. So the first 35 pages, let's see, the first, 27 pages really of text and maps deal with the town of Saltmarsh and how to adventure in it. And this should be the end of this first video. I just want to give you a couple of basic ideas as well. I really, really, really like the book. First of all, I like the art. I'm just going to give you a little bit of a look at the art. I mean, these are just really lovely, evocative pictures here. A very nice map. I've said it so many times, I love maps. I love the tables. I mean, just look at this. This is the Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh. I mean, just look at this haunted house. It is just awesome. Well, I haven't read this because I'm going to read one at a time, and then I'm just going to give you a brief overview over this story and how I found it. It's just a really well-written, very well-illustrated book. It's completely updated for 5e because these were old stories that basically you can find up here. At the very beginning, they will tell you when they were first published. So, The Sinister Secret of Saltmarsh dates back to 1981, Danger at Dunwater 1982, Salvage Operations 2005, The Isle of the Abbey 1992, The Final Enemy 1983, Tamarod's Fate 2004, and The Styes 2005. So they basically just took all of them and updated them for 5e. Of course, it is important to note, if you want to run it like this, you do need the monster manual, because there are no stats for the creatures in bold. But of course, if you say, like myself, oh, I'm just going to take the ideas and I'm just going to transfer them to my own universe, to my own monsters, then you just have to think, okay, what would be the Midgard equivalent of hobgoblins? And then you just take those stats. So that's not a problem at all. So who is Ghosts of Saltmarsh for? I would say it's for anyone who wants to run small adventures, because they are really small. I mean, they're probably 2 to 3 evenings, depending on how much role-playing your group does, that have something to do with the sea, regardless of where they are set. I don't even think it has to be Greyhawk. It could be anywhere. It could be any system. It could be any world. Or even take some of the items that are in the book, some of the tables, as adventure hooks, or as things to do when you enter a Dreadwood. It doesn't have to be this wood. It can be any forest. I mean, forests are dangerous. We all know this. Some say that Germans have a very strong affiliation with woods, and I think that's actually true. Forests are very important to us. And I love adventuring in forests. I love storytelling in forests. So for me, even just that part of the forest, which has nothing to do with the sea itself, is a really, really good reason to buy this. It's very, very evocative. And of course, I like the art. I'm not sure if this cover is still available, but the book itself is still available with the normal cover. And I just like the art about it. I like the writing style. And I just think it's also something that would work for somebody who is new to running games. If you're a new DM, then I would say don't convert it, play 5e with it. But I think it's got enough depth, but also enough guidance to make this work, except maybe for the factions, because that can be tricky. But if you just take them as little stories that you want to tell, that works. And then you can see if you can somehow throw in the factions after the first adventure to see how does it work. So basically, Ghosts of Saltmarsh 2019, Dungeons and Dragons. It's a great book. Back then it retailed at $49 US, 65 Canadian, and I think I paid about 45 or so euros. So that's all for today. I'm going to go through every single adventure that's in the book, and I'm going to do a review as I finish them. Okay, bye!